Hello friends, welcome back to our YouTube channel. If you like this video, please like, share and subscribe. I'll share our videos commanded by our experts, so let's begin.
If you like, please like, share and subscribe. So let's begin our today's topic. Let's begin.
Google's 2026 Pride Month Doodle features an interactive, sparkling disco ball. This digital entry point anchors a data set of 93 songs and historical profiles that map the genre's foundational LGBTQ+ pioneers. The tribute consists of two primary layers: a retro-stylized graphic designed by guest illustrator Oni Lyle, and a curated YouTube music playlist titled Disco Inferno, running for nearly 8 hours. Mainstream historical accounts frequently narrow disco's legacy to a commercial aesthetic, defined by polyester suits, thick platform shoes, and mid-70s pop trends. Google's tribute centers on a different history. It focuses on the Black, brown, and LGBTQ+ artists who established the genre within the underground clubs of the late 1960s. To understand why this history matters, we need to examine the specific socio-legal and spatial notes embedded within these 93 tracks. The creation of this music was dictated by spatial politics. Because these communities were restricted in where they could gather, the physical location of the club determined the sound. Early disco functioned as a vital infrastructure. It was a platform built specifically for the survival of marginalized groups through the act of joyful resistance. The origins of the genre are found in the legal landscape of the American urban center in the late 1960s. At this time, outward queer expression and simply gathering in public were actively criminalized. Minority and LGBTQ+ communities lived under a constant threat of state intervention. Routine police pressure effectively removed these groups from public, above-ground leisure spaces. This hostility forced the development of a hidden, underground nightlife infrastructure. These spaces were born from the immediate necessity of safe assembly. We can see this network forming across major cities. These hidden clubs functioned as illuminated nodes beneath the street level, responding directly to the legal pressure from above. This network operated in complete isolation from the mainstream commercial nightlife zones. Social organizing had to adapt to these hidden parameters. Community building moved into private, unadvertised spaces. During this era, the term safe space described a literal physical sanctuary. These rooms were required to prevent arrest and physical violence. Google's tribute highlights the interior architecture of these sanctuaries, specifically clubs serving Black and brown patrons. The Paradise Garage provides the structural blueprint. Its design centered on an elevated DJ booth that overlooked the entire dance floor. The figures in these booths, such as Larry Levan and Frankie Knuckles, acted as community leaders as much as musical curators. Larry Levan was the primary architect of the Paradise Garage environment, exerting total control over the atmosphere of the room. Levan and Knuckles utilized sound and lighting to facilitate a sense of psychological liberation. They managed the collective energy of the space in real time. Within these walls, the architecture allowed unpoliced physical expression that was impossible on the street. The dance floors were occupied by an intersectional demographic, predominantly gay, Black, and Latino residents who had been excluded from other social spheres. Because the space was physically secured from the outside world, patrons were able to drop the defensive postures required for survival in public. The physical architecture of the club and the control of the DJ worked together. They established an autonomous zone where marginalized identities existed without surveillance. We can map the specific sounds that powered these spaces by analyzing the 93 tracks in the Disco Inferno playlist. The data shows a foundation built on up-tempo funk, danceable R&B, and soul. When we isolate the deep underground cuts, we find the artists who actually engineered the genre's sound. Sylvester is a primary example. His outward queer expression drove the genre's musical innovation. The Village People similarly embedded queer underground culture and working-class archetypes into the mainstream musical framework. During an era of systemic oppression, these artists used their music as a functional tool to express love and liberation. The tempo of these tracks was deliberate. The repetitive, up-tempo beats were mathematically designed for the environment of the club. This sonic architecture was engineered to maintain physical stamina. It allowed patrons to dance for hours, sustaining the community's presence in the space. The early disco sound was a technical solution. It was a tool built to fuel the physical act of community persistence. Google's 8-hour playlist also catalogs the moment these underground mechanics reached the global market. The sonic elements developed in hidden clubs proved so compelling that they eventually moved into the commercial sphere. Diana Ross became a primary bridge, adapting soulful R&B to the new disco framework. Thelma Houston was equally essential in the evolution of these high-energy, danceable tracks. Pop groups like the Bee Gees utilized the underground's funk framework to achieve massive commercial success. International acts like Boney M demonstrated how these dance floor mechanics scaled to a global audience. As the music reached the mainstream, it was often stripped of its original radical context. The connection to its marginalized creators became less visible. The specific musical elements designed for queer survival ultimately became the blueprint for global pop music. This brings our focus back to the data within the 2026 Google Doodle. Mapping this playlist reveals a clear hierarchy. Massive pop hits occupy the outer rings, while the network's core remains underground. Structural anchors like Paradise Garage and DJ Frankie Knuckles provide the support for the entire genre. Within this continuum, Michael Jackson appears as a master beneficiary of the underground's work, rather than the source of the sound itself. We also see Prince's work as an adaptation of the up-tempo funk and gender-fluid expression first established in those early clubs. The evidence within the playlist allows us to reevaluate Ani Lyle's artwork. The Art of Disco catalogs a history of physical and sonic persistence. The tribute positions the 1970s dance floor as an essential site of civil rights work built within the constraints of underground life. The 1970s underground established a physical and sonic infrastructure that allowed marginalized communities to persist and eventually anchor the sound of global culture. To kick off Pride Month in 2026, Google replaced its homepage logo with a rotating, interactive graphic dedicated to the art of disco. This timeline maps out the scale of that historical acknowledgement. To accompany the graphic, they curated a playlist called Disco Inferno that plots 93 individual tracks, spanning nearly 8 continuous hours of music. A retrospective of this size naturally leans on the genre's global reach, highlighting peak commercial hits from pop icons like Michael Jackson. It also includes the Bee Gees, anchoring the popular memory of disco as a glossy, highly commercialized aesthetic that dominated the late 1970s. While disco is most often remembered today as a massive commercial pop phenomenon, its original function was a specific socio-political survival mechanism. The roots of this movement trace back to the late 1960s, deep within the underground club networks built by Black, Brown, and LGBTQ+ communities. In these spaces, disco functioned as a specialized spatial and sonic technology, a mechanism for joyful resistance. Curiously, we are looking at a historical paradox. One of the most profitable dance genres in history was designed by demographics experiencing severe, daily, systemic marginalization. To understand how that happened, we have to look at the 1970s underground club as a self-sustaining, closed-loop community network. We are going to systematically dissect the structural mechanics of these physical spaces, working backward from first principles. We will look at 3 specific elements: the oppressive legal constraints, the insulated physical boundaries, and the specific sonic inputs. Uncovering disco's true legacy requires analyzing it structurally, as an architecture built to keep marginalized people alive. We begin with the baseline legal reality of the late 1960s. For queer individuals and people of color, the urban environment was deeply hostile. Outward expression of queer identity, including wearing certain clothing or gathering in public, was actively criminalized and targeted by severe police enforcement. This policing removed the expectation of physical safety for these communities outside of strictly private, controlled environments. Operating in daylight meant navigating a macro-society that legally demanded the outward erasure of their specific identities. This graph maps the direct correlation. As legislative pressure and policing remained high through the decade, underground hubs bloomed beneath the surface of the city. The pressure of that hostile environment forced the engineering of hidden, unpoliced zones. The underground club was born from an absolute necessity for physical sanctuary. Let's examine the physics of that sanctuary, using legendary venues like the Paradise Garage as our historical proxy. This model breaks down the club's spatial mechanics. The outermost layer is the physical boundary wall, a deliberate, opaque insulator blocking out the criminalized exterior. Inside that shell, the dance floor operates as a vibrant, insulated zone, engineered for unpoliced identity expression. Crossing that specific architectural threshold triggered an immediate psychological shift, moving patrons from a state of hypervigilance to safety. Inside, isolated from the threat of the street, patrons were able to interact freely, forming a cohesive community grounded in mutual protection. It created a strict binary. High visibility on the outside was dangerous, while visibility on the inside was safe. The physical structure successfully neutralized the legal threats of the outside world, creating a secure vacuum that required a continuous energetic input to function. That energetic input is sonic architecture, the specific musical frequencies required to sustain the psychological safety of the room. The engineers of this architecture were legendary underground DJs like Larry Levan and Frankie. These DJs actively curated and manipulated the psychological state of the crowd, using sound to maintain a sense of collective security. They achieved this by blending deep underground cuts, up-tempo funk, and driving soul. Mapping those inputs back onto our spatial model, the DJ booth functions as a central transmitting node, projecting energetic waves outward. Continuous, uninterrupted mixing was crucial. It removed any silence, maintaining the illusion of an insulated reality. Through continuous sonic engineering, the DJ provided the platform that unified hundreds of individuals into a single, cohesive, breathing organism. The direct physiological response to that sonic architecture was relentless, unified celebration on the dance floor. This liberation was embodied by pioneering performers who became focal points for the community's energy, like the artist Sylvester. It also included acts like the Village People, who utilized highly specific visual aesthetics to reclaim hyper-masculine archetypes and broadcast defiance. In this context, dancing joyfully to driving R&B rhythms was a direct physical counter-response to a society demanding their erasure. This weaponized celebration, joyful resistance, was the primary output of the socio-spatial machine, demonstrating that physical assembly could persist despite legal erasure. Eventually, the energy generated inside these cultural pressure cookers reached a critical mass. This diagram shows what followed. The highly effective frequencies generated in these sanctuaries proved too powerful to remain contained, fracturing the boundary and bleeding into the broader culture. This outward expansion was driven by artists who scaled the underground sound into the global market, bringing us back to the icons featured on the modern Google playlist, like Diana Ross. As the aesthetic rapidly dominated mainstream radio and global charts, its original structural intent was obscured by commercialization. Today's massive global dance music industry rests upon a foundation of survival tactics engineered by a marginalized community. This brings us back to Google's 2026 doodle. By specifically targeting its tribute to the LGBTQ+, Black and brown pioneers of the era, the retrospective is sociologically rigorous. Disco exists historically as a specialized spatial and sonic technology, engineered specifically to counter systemic criminalization. But the insulated club was only the first phase of the genre's lifespan. In part 2 of this series, we will analyze exactly how these underground cuts and funk rhythms successfully scaled from an insulated safe space into a multi-billion-dollar global industry. Click the video on your screen to explore the structural mechanics behind disco's mainstream takeover.